Penny Wong, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you.
Can I start by asking you to spell out what this strategic concern is that the Prime Minister is talking about?
There's no doubt the world is changing. We've seen that. We've seen that in the very changed approach that the US administration under President Trump has to America's place in the world. And we know, as you said in your introduction, that this is going to affect Australia, it will affect our region. That's why it's so important for the government to have a very clear plan for these tariffs, which were unjustified and unwarranted, but a very clear plan on economic resilience and export diversification. And you saw the Prime Minister outlining that plan in stark contrast to what we saw from Peter Dutton.
But when we talk about what's happening in our region, clearly the Pacific are upset with Donald Trump's climate approach, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. There are the aid cuts and now this trade punishment in Southeast Asia in particular. Are you saying that this is all going to help China?
No, what I'm saying is the world is uncertain. We live in changing times, and that's why it's so important to have a government and a leader who makes the right calls. And what we did see this week, and what Australians saw, is that Peter Dutton's stubborn, he's arrogant, he always believes he knows best, and the problem is that leads him to make bad calls. You see that in his stubborn insistence on a deal with President Trump at whatever cost. You see that in a reckless and risky linking of defence into this trade dispute. And what this showed us was this is a man who makes bad calls, and this is a man who is a risk to this country when we face these uncertain times. What we need is clear, consistent, firm leadership that the Prime Minister is providing to invest in our relationships, to invest in Australia's resilience and economic and export diversification, and that's what we are doing.
I can see why you want to bring this back to the election contest here at the moment, fair enough, and we'll get to some of that. But just can I come back to what Donald Trump is doing in this region, what it means for us strategically? Is Donald Trump making us less safe?
There is no doubt that tariffs will have an impact on the global economy. There's no doubt that some of the countries in our region are amongst the hardest hit, and that we are realistic about that. And what I would say is that does affect US power in our region, which is why it is so US influence in our region, which is why it's so important for us to do what we are doing, which is investing in relationships, both strategic and economic, ensuring that we continue to deepen and broaden our defence and strategic relationships, including with our principal ally, the United States. That's why we are working so hard to shore up our relationships in the Pacific, which is why we are working so hard to shore up our relationships in Southeast Asia. Now, all of these are not on Peter Dutton's radar. That's the reality. OK,
you're a big defender of the rules-based order. You talk about it all the time. With what's happened over the last week, does that order still exist?
Well, there's certainly the US under President Trump has a very different role in the world and the global economy. We're realistic about that. But let's remember a couple of things. The first is, we have some agency here. We have some capacity to engage with other countries who also want to continue to see trade flow. We have a capacity to diversify our economic relationships. We know that US exports from Australia is about 5% of our exports, and that's why we've got to continue to grow our exports with other countries. India, which has become now our fourth largest export market, we see our Southeast Asian economic strategy, which I've talked about for the last couple of years.
Yes.
So important, and we're seeing that develop, and of course other trade agreements that we are in or pursuing.
But it is notable that you didn't answer whether the rules-based order still exists.
Well, look, of course it still exists, but it is under pressure. We're realistic about this. So the question is, how do you navigate that? And part of how you navigate that is by investing in your own economic resilience and by diversifying your economic relationships, which has been such an important part of what this government has done for the last 3 years.
Do we need to have a look at our alliances, our arrangements? A British parliamentary inquiry has just been launched into AUKUS. It will look at whether this is still on track amid geopolitical shifts Do we need to have a similar review or rethink here?
2 points. As the Prime Minister said, our strategic relationship and our alliance with the United States is bigger than a bad decision, and these tariffs we think are a bad decision. The second point I'd make is AUKUS is critical to Australia's defence capability. That's why we are proceeding down this path, and it's also why the call for by Mr Dutton to link defence into a trade dispute is so risky and so reckless, as Prime Minister Howard himself pointed out. It's a bad call by someone who consistently thinks he knows best.
But do we stick with AUKUS no matter what Donald Trump does?
We stick with AUKUS because it's in Australia's national interests, as all defence decisions should be, as all economic decisions should be. I mean, we stick with AUKUS because the submarine capability is important to our national interests. And why is it important? And I think that's important to remember. If I can go to this, we want to see peace, stability and prosperity in our region. And we do that by using all arms of national power. We do that by utilising our economic power. And we should talk about critical minerals at some point. We do that by utilising our diplomacy to frame the calculus, to signal red lines, to both reassure and deter. And we do that with credible military deterrence. That is part of how you ensure that you maintain a peaceful, stable and prosperous regions where the risk and costs of conflict outweigh any potential benefits. That's what we have to focus on.
So let's talk about what is on the table in trying to convince Donald Trump to change his mind. Obviously, defence, you say, should not be on the table, but critical minerals clearly are. Can you just tell us about what is being negotiated?
Well, this has been discussed for some time. We know critical minerals are a strategic economic asset in today's world. Now, the Prime Minister said he announced that we would have a critical mineral strategic reserve, and he also said we would have more to say about that. So we will have more to say about this in the days and weeks ahead. But the broader point is that this is an asset in a world that is increasingly uncertain. We need to use all of our assets, all of our economic power, and critical minerals are amongst those.
I understand the details that are come, but should we be thinking about this as Australia digging up the critical minerals, stockpiling them in a strategic reserve for the US to use as they wish?
David, I enjoy the fact that I understand the details are yet to come, and then you ask me questions about the details. But hang on, I do want to make this clear. No, we've made clear this is something Australia wants to do, the Australian government wants to do for Australia's interests. And we see this as a strategic economic asset.
But again, I mean, I asked David Littleproud this as well. Are we rewarding a bully here by giving Donald Trump the spectacular offer that he says he wants?
Well, we've talked about an Australian critical minerals reserve, a strategic reserve, but you know what would be what is not the way to deal with President Trump is to be prepared to put things on the table which are key to who we are and what it means to be Australian. This is the problem with Peter Dutton's stubborn insistence on trying to do a deal at any cost. I mean, we will not compromise on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme. We will not compromise on Australia's biosecurity. We saw the US Trade Representative in its assessment, which was provided to Congress, raise both of those issues, plus some of our digital regulation. We are not going to compromise on what it is to be Australian. And I think one of the things I was listening to Mr Littleproud, and one of the things that struck me when I was listening to him was they don't understand the extent to which the world has changed. They don't understand the extent to which the second Trump administration is not the same as the first. The second Trump administration regrets exemptions it gave and has not given exemptions to anyone. And yet you still have Peter Dutton and his colleagues, stubbornly insisting that they could do a deal at any cost, and recklessly insisting that we should play defence into a trade dispute.
Is there anything beyond critical minerals on the table?
Well, we will continue to put our case, but if what is required of us, the sorts of things that the USTR, the US Trade Representative, was outlining, is that Australia's not going to be compromising on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme.
Let me turn to a few other issues, Foreign Minister. You've joined international calls for an independent inquiry into the killing of Palestinians, 15 Palestinian medics and emergency workers in Gaza. Some mobile phone footage has emerged overnight. I'm not sure if you've seen this. It apparently comes from one of those paramedics who was killed, and it appears to contradict what the Israeli Defence Force initially said about what had happened. What do you make of this?
Well, what I have said is there needs to be a full and thorough investigation into this, and what I have consistently said since the conflict in Gaza began and since the horrific events of October 7 with the terrorist attack by Hamas is that we want a ceasefire, we want hostages to be returned, and we want international law and international humanitarian law to be observed by all parties. Now, international humanitarian law requires, amongst other things, humanitarian workers to be protected, and that applies to everybody. And I have consistently said that applies to everybody. Unfortunately, tragically, Gaza is one of the most dangerous places in the world to be an aid worker. And we are working with other countries on a declaration for the protection of humanitarian personnel. It's something I've engaged with many countries on, because it is time that the world remembered and reaffirmed the commitment we all gave each other in the aftermath of World War II that we would protect humanitarian workers as well as civilians.
And on this incident, there is an IDF inquiry. The Military's General Staff Command will run the inquiry. You're saying that's not good enough? It needs to be completely independent?
Well, there should be a full inquiry. It should be thorough. We want to see, the world wants to see, a proper, thorough inquiry. Now, we'll make an assessment of that, obviously, when we see what the Military Advocate General comes forward with.
Okay. The Port of Darwin. Why should this not be in the hands of Chinese-owned land bridge?
Look, I think it's pretty clear that critical infrastructure in a world that is more contested, in a region which is more contested, critical infrastructure such as ports, airports and other critical infrastructure, you would want to be in Australian hands or in we would want in Australian hands. Now, the Prime Minister's been on record for a very long time as having concerns about the sale of the port. We've certainly been working on what a sensible mechanism to return it to Australian hands would be, and that's what the Prime Minister has flagged.
Yet, about 18 months ago, the Prime Minister's department reviewed this. The report found, and I quote, "It was not necessary to cancel or vary the lease." And the Prime Minister made it clear at the time there wouldn't be an intervention or forced sale. What's changed?
Well, it also said we should continue to monitor, and what we have done since that time has been to engage with, for example, superannuation funds, and I think the Prime Minister has said that publicly, about what a prospective sale could look like and how we could give effect to that.
But why is the question here? Because that report was clear, it wasn't necessary. Is there new advice?
Well, there's the elected representatives of the country have made a clear decision that this is a piece of critical infrastructure that in the current circumstances we believe should be in Australian hands.
But is it based on any advice from any of the agencies?
Well, I think agencies both have spoken at length, as have others, about the circumstances in which we live, and that you need to ensure that your strategic resilience, part of that is economic, part of that is your military deterrence, and part of that is hardening your infrastructure. We've been clear about that.
The Prime Minister said yesterday this was a political decision. Is that right?
Political level decision. Yes, its elected representatives have made a call that in the current circumstances this piece of critical infrastructure should remain in Australian hands.
Batteries, the campaign announcement from Labor today, a 30% rebate on a household battery. You'll save up to $4,000 depending on the size of the battery. Look, it's still going to be out of reach, isn't it, for a lot of struggling families. Who's this going to benefit?
Well, we think, over out to 2030, about a million households. But can I tell you, the sort of mismatch that we're trying to address here is we've got a lot of people with solar on roofs, but not a lot of people with batteries to ensure they can make full utilisation of that power. We need to bridge that gap, and that's what this policy does. And let me say, Look, it's a policy that is a long way better than $600 billion for nuclear reactors, which is what Peter Dutton is promising, and which we know he will have to cut into Medicare to pay for.
Okay.
I mean, this is a bloke who'll cut everything
but just
except
on your
taxes.
policy, Penny Wong, those on the lowest incomes still won't be able to afford this, will they?
Well, it's not the only energy policy we have, and obviously you've seen energy rebates, and we know energy prices have been difficult. There's a whole range of reasons for that. One of them is the war in Ukraine, the effect on global energy prices. The other is nearly a decade of coalition government where we saw supply exit the system. And they haven't learnt. I mean, this comes back to this man, Peter Dutton's stubbornness, like he always knows best. They haven't learnt from their approach previously, and so now they've bowled up a policy which will cost $600 billion. I saw $600 billion. He's going to have to find the money for that. No. Well, it's the Smart Energy Council number, not mine.
Okay.
But I want to make this point.
Numbers,
well, of course, let's see them. But for 4%. 4% of Australia's energy grid. Like, it's a bad deal. If it's such a good deal, I'm wondering why Peter Dutton didn't go to Collie and explain to people there why that's the site for the nuclear reactor that he wants for WA.
A final question on foreign student numbers. Peter Dutton's this morning announced that a coalition government would reduce the number by 80,000 next year. Is that something you would match?
No, well, I got to say, I had a wry smile to myself when I read that story, because I thought, this is the bloke who is now announcing a policy he opposed, because you remember he opposed our caps on students, and he's also a bloke who's announced a policy to buy back a port that he helped sell. So I think everybody knows what sort of risk Peter Dutton is.
So you wouldn't match the 80,000 cut?
Well, we've already put in place policies which seek to manage better the number of foreign students coming into Australia. He voted again. He opposed that. We've already put that in place.
But you won't go as far as he's going on?
We will proceed with the policy framework that Tony Burke and Jason Clare have announced, which is looking to reduce the number of foreign students, which has delivered that, and which Peter Dutton opposed.
Foreign Minister Penny Wong, thanks for joining us this morning.
Great to speak with you.